Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Jays Down podcast. I'm your host, Jade. I'm here today with Kevin Ostreicher. He is one of the many hosts on the Locked On NFL podcast, also does the Locked On Ravens podcast. But glad to have him on the show tonight to talk some football with us. Thank you, Kevin, for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. I know it was a tough end in Baltimore considering how good they were, but got to get them again next year, I guess, is what we're saying here, although it's not very fun to say.
Right, of course. Yeah, man, they were close, man. Just couldn't get it done. So, but I really wanted to talk with you about today, man. Actually, one of the teams that the Ravens beat in the playoffs, and that was the only team they beat in the playoffs, and that was the Houston Texans. The Texans, Kevin, 10-7 this year. I think they exceeded a lot of expectations. C.J. Stroud, amazing. I mean, what did you think of Houston this year, man?
Oh, I was big on Houston. Even before the year started, I'm huge on C.J. Stroud. I grew up as an Ohio State guy, so I got the Ohio State bump over there for C.J. and everything that he did. But I think they surrounded him. It wasn't perfect. They're definitely going to look to add some weapons around him in the offseason. But you get Tank Dell back next year. I think they potentially even found something with the Devin Singletary, who it didn't work out with Dameon Pierce, and they figured that out and went to Singletary. But the defense, too, figuring out what happens with the John Bernard. He balled out this year for him. They have pieces on that defense, a Swiss Army knife and Jalen Petrie, and Derek Stingley's somebody that he's one of my favorite corners in the league. I think, he already is great, but I think there are even levels to him. But it all goes with Stroud, I think, where it was just his rookie season. He showed so much poise, and it reminded me of, it's not the exact same comparison, but some of like the 2019 Ravens a bit, where it's a young team, you run in, and the Ravens were the top dog. The Texans were the underdog in that game. But I think sometimes with your young team, you just got to go through a couple failures early, and then you can rise to that top. And I think that CJ pulled what a great win against Cleveland. Part of that was Joe Flacco decided to just be the old Joe Flacco that we know very well in Baltimore and throw a couple interceptions, pick sixes. But I think for CJ, the sky's the limit for him. He's already in people's top 10 quarterbacks, and I think it's only going to get better for him. So I'm excited to see what CJ can do.
Yeah, me too. And I love C.J. Stroud, man. Like you said, ever since he was at Ohio State, he's just phenomenal. And like I said, he's very calm. He's poised in the pocket. He doesn't get, flustered, and that was one of the things I've noticed watching him throughout the season. And in the game against Cleveland, he was just back against supposedly one of the league's top defenses. But, he was just poised back there, man, and he was doing his thing. And if you listen to him, he's done a couple interview stuff. He's got a cool story too. He's got a cool background. I'm sure you probably read up on it, but if you haven't, guys, please. His story is phenomenal, and he's a very humble kid too.
Yeah, I'm excited for him. And I know, again, with CJ's success, and this is kind of going off topic a tiny bit, but I think there's been a lot of teardown of Bryce Young and what has happened with Bryce in Carolina. Yeah. But I think both guys, CJ, obviously we already know what he has the potential to be. But I think Bryce, hopefully in a better situation with Dave Canales, I think both those guys, and they're good friends. CJ and Bryce are good friends, and they can build each other up. I was a little bit higher on Bryce Young than most. I don't take height as much of it into consideration as other people do. I understand it's a factor. But I think that, maybe we look back on this in 5 years or so. We see Bryce turning around in Carolina with hopefully some more stability, and CJ continue to ascend the way he has.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of those things you like to see with a young quarterback and then a new head coach. The Texans, DeMeco Ryan's first year as a coach, to rally those guys and lead them to the play. That's a hard thing to do. And so for him to be able to do that, he's got those guys playing with a fire, and I'm excited for the Texans' future. I really am excited. I think they'll be back for sure.
Oh,
yeah. But yeah, so talk a little bit about Baltimore. You guys, you lost, a few pieces there. The coaching staff, wise. You're losing Anthony Weaver, Greg Roman. He was gone the year before anyway, but still, things will be a little bit different coaching wise. So we can talk about that and how that might have effect on the team next year.
Yeah, I think this was expected, but I think it stings a whole lot more because they didn't get the job done when they could have. And we know that no two teams are the same. No two coaching staffs, no two rosters. It's all different. And Baltimore certainly is feeling that now because Mike Macdonald goes to Seattle as the head coach there. And you can kind of tell with each great defensive performance, with each great game they had against the top team, it was looking more and more likely. And even the GM of Seattle and even the owner were talking about how after Mike Macdonald essentially almost shut out their team, they won like 36-7 or something. They said, "Oh wait, we need to get our eyes on this guy. Let's figure out what this guy's doing." So Macdonald's gone to Seattle. Anthony Weaver's now the new defensive coordinator in Miami. Denard Wilson's now the new defensive coordinator in Tennessee. And you have other guys leave too. Joel Ortiz went to be the general manager over in Los Angeles with the Chargers, and a couple other assistant coaches have followed Jim Harbaugh and Ortiz over to Los Angeles. So this has been a theme for the Ravens, not necessarily to this extent, but they've always been some sort of a coaching factor. And I think it's because of, in terms of NFL franchises, they are regarded, I think, some franchises want to do things the way that Baltimore does. And I think it's a little interesting because now you have the Ravens, who they promote Zach Orr, defensive coordinator. He was their linebackers, but actually it's the 4 straight promotions for their defensive coordinator job. All of them have been the inside linebackers coach. So I guess if you want to be an NFL defensive coordinator, just go be Baltimore's inside linebacker coach, and you got a free ticket to it right there. Right. But it is going to be a little, I'd say, difficult early to adjust. I mean, Baltimore can do it. John Harbaugh put together a great staff last season, and he's done it for a while now. I wouldn't expect anything different. But in my opinion, I think that, again, you have a play caller in Zach Orr that hasn't called plays at any level before. He got into the coaching game after his career ended early due to an injury. He was a second-team All-Pro when the Ravens ended up having him in. He was an undrafted guy for 3 years. So I think that Baltimore is going to have some sort of a learning curve with Zach Orr, but I think it will turn out okay. You keep the system that McDonald had. I know it's a tough loss to have McDonald go, and especially the way they didn't end the season on the right note. But I still think it'll be all right in Baltimore. I know it's a lot of doom and gloom right now because of how the way the season ended, and rightfully so. I'm sure we'll talk about the game. But coaching-wise, it was expected, but it doesn't sting any less.
Yeah, and like you said, and this has been a huge talking point, and I mentioned this on my previous episode when I was talking a little bit about Baltimore, and I was questioning the fact if they could ever make it back to the Super Bowl. It's like because I mentioned on there, and I'll mention it here too. I feel like the window for them really is now, because you think about it, these teams in the AFC are going to keep getting better, but like you're going to have the Texans and maybe potentially the Chargers if Harbaugh works out right. So it's like I think now the Ravens really they got to figure out some type of way to keep moving. To get to that big game. I mean, and a big talking point was that they didn't really run the ball. So you covered them. So kind of talk about what you heard about that as far as what the game plan was coaching wise there.
Yeah, so John Harbaugh had an end of season poll after the game. He initially said, that's just the way the game went. We didn't run the ball. It's just the way the game went. And I think a lot of Ravens fans were, in fact, I know a lot of Ravens fans were not happy with that answer because it's stuff that we've heard before. Where in Baltimore, John Harbaugh, that 2019 game against the Titans where the Ravens got punched in the mouth by Tennessee early in that game and they abandoned their identity, John Harbaugh said, well, it's just the way the game went. Even in 2023 this year, Keaton Mitchell, who was great for him before getting injured, against Cleveland, he had, I think it was like 2 carries for 80 yards and like a touchdown, and then he got 2 carries the rest of the game for like 3 quarters, and the Ravens lost that game. That was when Deshaun Watson broke his shoulder and didn't have an incompletion in the second half. And John Harbaugh said, well, that's just the way the game went. Didn't get the ball, that's just the way the game went. And then now in this playoff game, the AFC Championship didn't run the ball, and John Harbaugh said, well, that's just the way the game went. So it's that trend where I think you hit the nail on the head there, where the Ravens window, every quarterback has a prime. This is not a Lamar Jackson thing, and this has nothing to do with his play style, because I believe Lamar can play into his late 30s, honestly, because I do think the potential is there, and he's already shown what he can do. But every quarterback has a prime. Now, how far does it extend? We don't know. But in my opinion, the reason John Harbaugh stays on as the coach of this team this year is because they took a step forward and they made the AFC Championship game, where they hadn't made the AFC Championship game since they won the Super Bowl back in 2012, 2013. So my initial, when I did my season predictions and what I thought was an acceptable, I guess, exit for them this year, I said, hey, we'll make the Asian Championship game, and I'm cool, right? It's a step in the right direction. But they were so good this season that I adjusted my expectations. And I was like, look, who should this team lose to really unless they beat themselves? And what did they do against the Chiefs? The Chiefs hit them in the mouth early, right? I mean, they scored 2 early touchdowns. But in my opinion, I thought the Ravens got punched in the mouth and they played scared for the rest of the game, where I thought what their mindset was, okay, Patrick Mahomes just put up 14 quick points on us. This is going to be a 35-34 shootout, and we have to match that. We have to match their, whether it's explosive plays. And they probably said, we can't play that ball control run style offense because we have to pick up chunk yards because Mahomes is going to dice up the defense. But then Mike McDonald adjusted. The Chiefs did not score a point in the second half. And Baltimore was kind of left with their tail between their legs because what got them there, they got there by running the ball. That's how their offense kind of picked up momentum and steam. And then Baltimore didn't necessarily do what got them there. I mean, you can't abandon your identity in that way, and they have done it not consistently, but it has been there really since in Lamar's tenure with John Harbaugh. So for me, I think the Ravens can get back there, but if they don't get back there, I know it's really hard. If the Ravens make the AFC Championship game again next year and lose, it's hard to fire a coach that makes the AFC Championship game 2 years in a row, but you don't play football to make the Asian Championship game and lose, right? For Lamar, he wants this more than I think anybody. Like he is so competitive and he is so ready to win, and I think they can do it. But they had a great shot this year, and they didn't take advantage.
Yeah, and Lamar, just a few weeks ago, he went on, Tom Brady's podcast, Let's Go podcast, and he was like, hey, he's like, I want to win a Super Bowl. Like that's the next thing. I got MVP. Make the Pro Bowl, like done all that stuff, and that's like next thing on the list for me is a Super Bowl. He's like, that's what. He's like, I feel like we have the team to do it. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So, I hope that for Baltimore's sake that they can do it because, like I said, I mean, these teams are going to keep getting better. It's going to be tougher for them to make it back. So, the window is now for the Ravens to win. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, man, switching gears here. So obviously all the head coaching vacancies have been filled. We know about Ray Morris, here in Atlanta, Mike McDonald to the Seahawks, Dan Quinn to Commanders. So out of all these hires, which one do you think it just for right now was the best hire for these teams?
I think my Ravens bias will say Mike McDonald, but I'll give you a different answer because I don't want to be all Ravens here for you. I did like the Raheem Morris hire. I think that again, some people are he's just a retread and why are you going down that? I actually think more. First of all, he's like one of the best people in the whole league. Like he's somebody that a lot of people not only respect, but they just love to talk to, play for, be around. And I think for Atlanta to have that culture in there, I mean, I think with Arthur Smith, it just clearly was not the right fit. It just did not work out. And now the Ravens get to play him twice a year because he's in Pittsburgh as the offensive coordinator. But I've always been a big, especially the way that they've used their draft picks. I know some people aren't as big of a fan, but you have these like generational talents like Kyle Pitts and Bijan and Drake London. You just got to add the quarterback. I mean, that's really what it is. And I think that the reason that people weren't like necessarily giddy on the Morris hire, at least the reason some people weren't, was because, they're going to probably bring in a different quarterback. Go get a coach that's like this quarterback guru. But even though the league is transitioning to these young, bright offensive minds, that's not what it has to be for every single team. And I think Atlanta added pieces on that defense where I think Morris can get the best out of them. So I guess it's an unconventional hire, I guess, in the way that things are going in today's game. But I know Justin Fields to Atlanta has been like the talking point of the offseason, and whether that's going to be a thing or not, which I think it would be fine if they did that. It's I think better than the options they've had. But in my opinion, you get a quarterback in there, you have Raheem Morris, who can be he's a galvanizer. I think players respect him, players want to play for him. And sometimes that's just what you need. So I'm excited for him. I think Brian Callahan also in Tennessee, he has the quarterback experience. And I will admit, I was not a Will Levis guy coming out of the draft. I was not in on him. I was not a believer. But he's made a bit of a believer out of me over his rookie year, what he showed. So I think for Callahan, again, it's not like the be all end all hire here in Tennessee, but I think with the quarterback success he's had, working with Burrow and Browning Browning was a guy who came in when Burrow got injured, and everyone was like, all right, Cincinnati's going to lose every game. Who is this Browning guy? And then he actually was pretty solid. So I think Callahan is kind of like a quarterback whisperer type of guy, could maybe help Levis. And I know Tennessee, I'm not putting them in the Super Bowl conversation or anything, but I think, a couple of years of a plan there, and maybe it could work for him.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, it's just like I said, I wasn't a big Will Levis fan either. He tore my Falcons up when we played him. But he's one of those raw guys, and I think under a guy like Callahan, he'll develop more, and hopefully the offensive line, hopefully Bill can get the offensive line right. Hey, imagine how funny it is now you get to be your dad's boss. Imagine how funny it is, right? You the boss your dad around the field, yeah. Brian and Bill. But yeah, I mean, hopefully they get that offensive line together because that was a weak point for him. And I think the Morris hire was good. I thought Ben Johnson, surprisingly, going back to the Lions after all the rumors and stuff about him not interviewing well, then the story changed. He had a big asking price. I'm like, what? That was a little weird. But hey, he's maybe next year he might come back. He might go to another team, but he decided to go back to Detroit. So.
Yeah, that whole situation is so interesting, and the fact that the story, it happened mid-flight where he's like, the Commanders were ready and they were going, and he's like, actually, I'm not doing this, and they still met with Aaron Glenn, and I think Glenn's both Johnson and Glenn I think will be hot names next season, but it is weird because I was kind of talking about this with Mike McDonald, where you don't know what your next year is going to look like. And so if Detroit's offense suffers a ton of injuries and, Goff regresses or something like that, and the Lions offense isn't as good, it was almost like what I was talking about with McDonald, where the Ravens were really healthy this year. And I think that's another reason, because health, I think, is a huge part of sports. I mean, for me, somewhat of a sidetrack, I'm a huge Denver Nuggets guy. And their entire team was healthy when they needed it to be. No one was injured. And some other teams in the NBA were injured. And that's just sometimes what you got to take advantage of if you're a team. And I thought the Nuggets weren't good, but health plays a huge role in everything. And so for Ben Johnson, yeah, what if Jared Goff gets injured? What if Lions off? Or what if Jahmyr Gibbs, hits a sophomore slump, which I'm a big Jahmyr Gibbs guy. I don't think it's going to happen. But it depends on, it's a year-to-year basis for these coaches. And what if it just doesn't work out for the Lions next year? And now all of a sudden, all these places that really wanted you are like, we saw this offense do really well, so we're going to go with this guy over you. Because it's so much of what have you done for me now lately, league, where a performance you had last season can get wiped out like that if you have a bad performance on top of it and it's more recent. It's almost like it's recency bias in a way, where people what you do in the now, not in the past. So Johnson's had 2 years of good developmental stuff in Detroit, but it's not a guarantee it happens for 3 straight years. And that's kind of where, if I'm a coach and my goal is to become a head coach, again, you don't take an opportunity that you don't think is right for you, obviously. But it seemed like he did have options, not just the Commanders, and he decided to go back to Detroit. He believes. I mean, we saw Bobby Sloat do the same thing in Houston. Gerard Johnson even is a quarterback coach, which is even crazier. Do the same thing. But if you're in a situation you're like, I'm not going to blame anybody for going back and trying to finish what they started. I mean, heck, I wish Matt McDonald did it in Baltimore. he kind of kept himself around. But every coach, every player has different goals, different aspirations, and if they want to try to win the whole thing with something that they started, again, I can't fault anybody for that.
Yeah, I can't either. But it's interesting. So he heads back to Detroit. We'll see what they do next year. I am excited to see the Lions' future, as well. Like the Texans, I think they're going to be a team that's going to be back in it a bunch of times. They just maybe a little bit better coaching in the championship game. Maybe some better coaching decisions. But hey, man, that's the game of football, man. It's that's how it is. Sometimes it can be a game of just inches and just all little just choices, man. Just Just so that's how it is. That's why we love it. So yeah, man. I also wanted to ask you about another coach that has not that doesn't have a head coaching job. That's Mike Vrabel. Are you surprised that he didn't get hired?
Yeah, I am. I am a little bit. It felt like he won over a lot of hearts of just national people and people across the league. And I know there were the reports I saw where he was like too big or something.
Yeah, right.
People like didn't want, he was like intimidating or something. If you're operating your franchise that way and you missed out on a great football mind, someone who can rally players together just because he's a little taller than you. I mean, look, I'm short, man, so I'm looking up like this at Mike Vrabel. And if I'm a decision maker, that to me, it can influence you. I am surprised. And it's almost like, I labeled them as the big three with Belichick, Vrabel, and Carroll. All three of those, veteran coaches, experienced, obviously Belichick and Carroll Super Bowl winners, and Belichick a little more than Carroll in that regard. But I still think that all three of those coaches not having a job, I mean, look, if you had told me, yeah, two of those guys won't or one of those guys won't, I would have said, all right, that makes sense. People want to go young. People want to, have a potential dynasty for him at coach and whatnot. But Bill Belichick has the track record if you're looking for a coach, and then you have other experience there too. I'm shocked not only Vrabel didn't get one, but now we're sitting here. Those three coaches are now, none of them have head coaching opportunities.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, now Belichick, I can kind of understand. Like, I know, like a lot of for example, there was big news about him possibly coming to Atlanta, but that I just didn't think he would. It just didn't really make logical sense as far as because longevity wise,
right?
He probably won't be here for like the next couple of years anyway, and
the
team is in a position where they need to go with a different. In a different way, and the way he likes to run things, I don't think it would coincide with how.
Yeah.
So I can understand. Pete Carroll, I'm not so sure. And then of course Mike Vrabel, I am shocked. Like, he's a great coach. He's very well respected. Has his guys fighting. In Tennessee just wasn't a good situation this year.
Right.
So hopefully hopefully he'll get a job next year, whether it's a coordinator or a coach. We'll see. But yeah, we'll see about that, man. But yeah, man, Kevin, that'll pretty much wrap us up, man, for this episode. Like I said, I appreciate you coming on and giving us some insight here on the Ravens side of things, and how that went. And hopefully, like I said, I hope to see them back in the playoffs next year. I want to see them hosting up that Lombardi Trophy. That's what I want to see Lamar holding that Lombardi Trophy. I think he deserves it, but that's, again, we'll see. But yeah, man, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, no, appreciate you. Thanks for having me. Now, look, I'm hoping too. I'm hoping to see Lamar host that thing too. I think there are a lot of players in the NFL that deserve it. I mean, he's at the top of my list. I mean, he wants it so bad. He works really hard, and I'm hoping he gets it one day, whether it's next year or whenever it is. But I appreciate you having me, man. Thanks so much.
Of course, man. Thank you.